He worked quietly, sweeping the marble floors of the courthouse while most people were busy in their own worlds. Being a single dad was not easy, and life had never given him an easy path. But he found some comfort in the routines of his work. The courthouse was always busy, with people rushing to meetings, hearings, and appointments. The echoes of footsteps and the murmur of voices were normal to him, a soundtrack to his life. Yet on this particular morning, something unusual caught his eye. At the end of the hall, in a courtroom he had passed countless times, sat a woman who stood out. She was older, in her late 50s, wearing a uniform that once carried the weight of honor and respect. She had medals on her chest and a disciplined air about her, but her eyes told a different story. They were heavy with worry, exhaustion, and a sense of being abandoned. He stopped for a moment, pretending to adjust the mop handle, but his eyes could not leave her dot. She was alone, and he knew she didn't belong in this position. Her posture was straight, but there was a slump in her shoulders, as if the weight of the world had suddenly fallen upon her. Papers were scattered around her, documents she was trying to organize, but she looked confused and frustrated. He could see the small tremble in her hands when she reached for one of the files. As a janitor, he was not supposed to notice the details of court cases, and yet he couldn't help it. Something about her presence demanded attention. He moved closer under the guise of tidying up and heard bits and pieces of a conversation from the judge's chamber that filtered through the cracks in the door. The words were harsh, dismissive, and they sent a chill down his spine. This was a person who had served her country, who had risked her life for others, and now she was facing challenges that she should not face alone. He remembered his own life, the struggles of raising a daughter alone, the sleepless nights, the worry, the constant balancing act. He thought about what it meant to feel abandoned and powerless. The feeling in his chest tightened, and without thinking, he decided to linger. He had no legal training, no connections in the courtroom, but he had something else. He had heart. For days, he observed her quietly. He learned her routine, when she arrived and left, when she had hearings, and when she was left sitting alone, waiting for assistance that never came. He noticed the small gestures she made, like straightening, her medals, taking deep breaths, and trying to remain composed even when the frustration was evident. He saw her struggle with forms and papers, and how the clerks often ignored her requests for help. It was as if the world had turned its back on her, and no one noticed. One morning, as he was cleaning the hallway, she walked out of the courtroom. Her face was pale, and her hands were shaking slightly. She looked exhausted, defeated. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She looked at him, surprised. I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a vulnerability in her that made him pause. Here was a person who had been brave enough to lead in dangerous situations, now admitting uncertainty to a stranger. He felt a surge of determination. He couldn't let her face this alone. From that moment, he started small. He offered to carry her files, to help organize her papers, even to get her a glass of water when the courtroom staff ignored her. She was hesitant at first, but there was something genuine in his concern. Slowly, she began to trust him, sharing fragments of her story. She told him about her years in service, the missions she had led, and the people she had saved. She told him about the sudden discharge, the confusing legal battle, and the way her previous lawyer had abandoned her. She had no one left, it seemed, and the weight of the system was pressing down on her. He listened, really listened. He didn't offer advice or judgment, just a steady presence. And in that simple act, he became her anchor. He learned her fears, her frustrations, and even her small joys. He saw her struggle to keep her dignity in a world that seemed determined to strip it away. And he realized that he could not stand by any longer. He began to research quietly, using the courthouse library during his breaks. He read legal papers, tried to understand procedures, and learned as much as he could about her case. He knew he could not represent her in a courtroom legally, but he could prepare her, help her organize evidence, and make sure her voice was heard. He discovered mistakes in the handling of her case, overlooked evidence, and procedural errors. Each discovery strengthened his resolve. At home, he juggled his responsibilities as a father with this growing mission. He explained to his daughter that he was helping someone in need, someone who had given so much to protect others. She understood. In her own way, proud of her father for standing up for what was right. Their evenings were spent reviewing documents together, with his daughter asking questions and offering simple observations that often revealed overlooked details. It became a quiet partnership, a family mission of sorts. Back at the courthouse, he continued to support her. He noticed the subtle changes in her demeanor. She was no longer completely defeated. She would smile faintly when he brought her a cup of coffee or helped sort a stack of papers. Her eyes, once clouded with despair, now held a spark of hope. It was small, fragile, but it was there. The courthouse staff began to notice too. Some whispered about the janitor, who spent more time than necessary helping the former colonel. Others were skeptical, thinking he had no right to intervene. But he paid them no mind. His focus was on her, on making sure she was not alone in a place that could be cold and unfeeling. One afternoon, he saw her slumped over a bench, exhausted and frustrated. The hearing had not gone well. The judge had dismissed several important points, and her previous lawyer's absence left her vulnerable. He approached her carefully, kneeling beside her. "You don't have to face this alone," he said firmly. "I'm here, and I will do whatever I can to help." She looked at him, a mix of disbelief and gratitude in her eyes. "Why?" she asked simply. She couldn't understand why a stranger would care so much. "Because it's the right thing to do," he replied. "You've given your life for others. Now it's time someone stands with you." For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a small smile. There was a bond forming, one built on trust, respect, and mutual understanding. He was not just a janitor. He was a single father who knew what it meant to struggle, to fight for those you care about. And she, a woman who had dedicated her life to serving others, was beginning to see that help could come from the most unexpected places. From that day forward, his presence became a quiet reassurance. He was there to pick up the pieces when the system seemed to fail her, to provide a steady hand and a listening ear. Each day brought new challenges, new obstacles in the case, but he remained steadfast. And though he knew the road ahead would be difficult, he was determined to see it through. Life had a way of testing people, of putting them in situations that seemed impossible. But in this unlikely partnership, two lives intersected in a way that neither expected. He, a man who had faced his own battles as a single parent, and she, a woman who had faced the horrors of combat and the betrayal of a flawed system, found strength in each other. And in that strength, a quiet courage began to grow, one that would soon change the course of their lives in ways they could never have imagined. The next day, he arrived at the courthouse earlier than usual. The halls were empty, and the sound of his footsteps echoed softly. He carried a small notebook filled with notes from the previous day. Every detail mattered, the judge's reactions, the documents she struggled with, the times when her questions were ignored. He wanted to be ready, not just to help her, but to make sure she had a voice that would be heard. She entered shortly after, carrying herself with the same pride and discipline that had defined her for years. Yet there was still a shadow behind. Her eyes, a fear that the day's challenges might overwhelm her. He approached quietly, offering a reassuring nod. She acknowledged him with a faint smile, grateful that he had kept his word to be there. As the morning progressed, he followed her into the courtroom, taking a discreet seat at the back. Today's hearing was more complicated, involving testimonies and documents that required careful attention. She struggled to follow, flipping through pages, highlighting sections, and scribbling notes in the margins. He watched carefully, noticing the points where she hesitated, the moments she looked unsure. Each time she faltered, he made a mental note, preparing ways to help her understand or organize the information outside the courtroom. During a brief recess, he approached her desk quietly. "I went over your papers last night," he said softly. "I think we can organize them so the important points are clear. Maybe we can make a timeline of events. That might help the judge understand better." Her eyes lit up slightly, a mixture of relief and hope. "Would you do that for me?" she asked, almost in disbelief. She was used to relying on lawyers and legal teams, not a single dad from the courthouse who had no formal training. He nodded, saying, "I can try. It might help, and at least you won't feel alone." They spent the recess together, sorting through the stacks of paper. He held files steady while she read aloud, making notes of what was missing or confusing. They created a timeline on a large sheet of paper, marking key dates, incidents, and actions. It wasn't perfect, but it gave her a clearer picture of her case and a sense that someone cared enough to fight alongside her. Her fingers trembled slightly as she wrote, but she looked more focused, less burdened by the chaos that had overwhelmed her before. Throughout the day, he stayed close but careful not to interfere inappropriately. He watched the reactions of the judge and the court staff, noting when she seemed dismissed or ignored. Each time, he made a mental note for later, ideas for how to counter or clarify. Though he could not speak in court, he felt his support mattered. Sometimes the presence of a steady ally could make a difference bigger than words. After the hearing, they walked down the courthouse steps together. The air outside was cool, a welcome change from the tension of the courtroom. She sighed, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "I don't know how I got into this mess," she admitted, her voice quiet. "I've faced danger, risked my life, and yet here I am, feeling powerless." He looked at her with empathy. "Sometimes the battles we face outside the battlefield are the hardest. You're not powerless, though. You've survived worse, and now you just need some support. That's what I can give you." She nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. It wasn't much, but it was a start. They walked together to a nearby bench, sitting side by side as she rested briefly. He took out his notebook and began jotting down observations from the day, ideas for organizing her documents, and points that needed clarification. She watched him silently, realizing that he was not just helping her with the papers, but also providing emotional support that had been missing from her life for months. Over the next few days, their routine solidified. He arrived early, ready to assist, and she came prepared to work with him. They organized documents, highlighted key points, and rehearsed explanations that she could use in court. Each day, she became slightly more confident, able to articulate her points with clarity. It wasn't a sudden transformation, but a gradual strengthening that came from knowing someone was genuinely in her corner. He also reached out quietly to people he thought could help retired lawyers who frequented the courthouse, legal students looking for experience, and even courthouse staff who had knowledge of procedures. At first, they were skeptical, surprised that a janitor was so invested in a case. But his sincerity was undeniable. Slowly, some began offering advice, pointing out procedural details he might have overlooked. Together, they formed an informal support network, small but effective, with him coordinating quietly and efficiently one afternoon. While they were reviewing documents in a quiet corner of the courthouse, she confided in him. "I feel like the system has abandoned me," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "I've served my country, followed every rule, and yet here I am, fighting alone." He listened carefully, understanding that words alone could not erase her frustration. "The system isn't perfect," he said softly, "but we can work within it. You're not alone anymore. I'm here, and we can figure this out together." Her eyes met his, and for a moment, the weariness softened. There was trust there now, fragile but real. She allowed herself to rely on him, to admit fears and doubts she had been holding inside. That trust was a turning point. It gave her the courage to face the courtroom again, knowing she had someone who believed in her. Days turned into weeks. Each hearing brought new challenges, but they approached them methodically. He prepared her for questions, organized evidence, and reminded her to stay calm when the judge's tone was harsh. She learned to anticipate procedural obstacles and to present her points clearly. Her confidence grew, small but steady, fueled by the knowledge that she no longer faced this alone. Outside the courtroom, their bond deepened. They shared simple conversations about life, family, and perseverance. He talked about his daughter, the struggles of raising her alone, and the little victories that kept him going. She shared stories from her time in service, the moments of fear, courage, and sacrifice that shaped her. These conversations were more than just passing time. They created understanding, respect, and a human connection that went beyond the case. One evening, after a particularly long day, she looked at him and said, "I don't know what I would do without you. You've given me hope when I didn't think there was any left." He shook his head, smiling softly. "I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just stayed. Sometimes that's all people need, someone who doesn't leave." Her eyes glistened with emotion. She realized that the man beside her was more than a helper. He had become her anchor. In a world that had often been cold, unfair, and dismissive, his presence reminded her that compassion and humanity still existed. And for the first time in a long while, she felt that victory in some form was possible. As the case progressed, they continued their work, navigating challenges and setbacks. Each success, no matter how small, was celebrated. Each failure was met with renewed determination. They had formed a partnership built on trust, empathy, and a shared belief in doing what was right. And though neither could predict the outcome, they knew that facing the battle together made it bearable, even hopeful. Through it all, he remained quiet, focused on the details, on the human side of the struggle. He reminded her that strength came not just from fighting, but from supporting, listening, and standing by someone when they needed it most. She carried that lesson with her into the courtroom, gaining the confidence to advocate for herself in ways she hadn't believed possible. The journey was far from over, but with each passing day, the sense of isolation faded, replaced by determination, courage, and the knowledge that she had an ally who would not abandon her. The morning air was crisp, and the courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and polished floors. He arrived early, as always, carrying a folder with carefully organized notes and papers. He knew that today's hearing would be critical. There was a sense of tension in the air, one he could feel as he pushed open the heavy courtroom doors. She was already there, standing tall despite the worry in her eyes. He approached quietly, offering a nod that spoke volumes. She returned it, a small but meaningful acknowledgement of their growing partnership. Inside the courtroom, the proceedings began promptly. The judge, a stern figure known for his no-nonsense approach, reviewed the files and listened to the opening statements. She struggled to present her points clearly, the pressure evident in the slight tremble of her hands. He watched closely, taking mental notes on where she hesitated and what might need clarification later. Though he could not speak in court, he prepared himself to provide support the moment the hearing adjourned. During a break, he approached her with quiet determination. "I think we can organize your documents so that your key points are easy to follow," he said gently. She looked at him, hope flickering in her eyes. "Will you help me?" she asked, almost shyly. He nodded. Yes, we can do this together. Step by step. They spent the break going over papers, creating a clear outline of the events she needed to explain. Dates, incidents, and crucial evidence were highlighted and arranged logically. Each note, each line of text, became a piece of the story she had struggled to tell. He listened as she explained moments she had thought the court would never understand. He offered suggestions without judgment, simply helping her see the bigger picture. By the end of the break, her posture was a little straighter, her eyes brighter. After the break, the hearing resumed. She delivered her points with more confidence, pausing only to refer to the notes they had prepared. He noticed how the small preparations gave her steadiness and clarity. The judge, initially stern, began to pay closer attention, leaning forward slightly as she presented her timeline. Though he could not predict the outcome, he felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that she was being heard more effectively than before. As the hearing continued, new challenges arose. A witness presented a statement that seemed confusing and inconsistent. She paused, unsure how to respond. He quietly handed her a folded note with reminders of key points and questions to ask. She glanced at it and nodded, regaining her composure. The witness's words were addressed calmly, and the judge acknowledged her points. It was a small victory, but in the moment, it felt significant. After the hearing, they stepped outside, the bright light of the afternoon sun casting long shadows on the courthouse steps. She exhaled deeply, the tension of the morning easing slightly. I don't know how I would manage this without you, she said, her voice soft but sincere. He shook his head gently. You're doing this. I'm just here to make it a little easier. They walked to a nearby bench, sitting together in quiet reflection. He pulled out his notebook, reviewing observations from the morning. He made notes about the witness statements, the judge's reactions, and the areas where she had shown hesitation. She watched him work, a sense of relief washing over her. For the first time in months, she felt that she had someone truly in her corner. Over the next few days, they continued their routine. Each morning began with careful preparation, reviewing documents and rehearsing responses. Each afternoon was spent in court, facing new challenges and obstacles. She became more confident, able to present her points clearly, while he remained a steady, calm presence, observing and providing guidance when needed. Their bond grew stronger, rooted in trust, respect, and the shared goal of justice. He also reached out quietly to others who might help. Retired lawyers, legal assistants, and courthouse staff began to take notice of their efforts. Some were skeptical, but his sincerity and dedication could not be ignored. Slowly, a small network of support formed around them. People offered advice, shared resources, and provided guidance. He coordinated everything quietly, ensuring that she remained the center of the effort. It was never about him. It was about her, and ensuring she had the tools she needed. One evening, as they left the courthouse together, she shared more of her story. She spoke of missions in far-off places, of the people she had led and protected, and of the sacrifices she had made. Her voice trembled slightly at times, but there was pride in her words. He listened intently, asking questions to understand and to help clarify details that might be important for the case. In turn, he shared moments from his life, the struggles of raising a child alone, the nights spent worrying, and the small victories that kept him going. Their conversations were simple, human, and grounding, creating a connection that went beyond the legal battle. As the days turned into weeks, their preparation began to show results. She delivered her points with clarity and confidence, and the judge started to acknowledge her efforts. He noticed small changes in her demeanor, the way she stood, the steadiness of her voice, and the look of determination in her eyes. Each success, no matter how minor, was a step forward. Each setback was met with renewed focus and strategy. One afternoon, after a particularly challenging session, she looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and exhaustion. "I don't know how I would face this without you," she admitted. He smiled softly. "You are facing it. I'm just making sure you don't have to face it alone." The bond between them had grown into something profound. She no longer felt abandoned, no longer felt that the system was against her entirely. There was hope, fragile but real, and it was fueled by his unwavering support. He reminded her that courage was not only about facing danger, but also about standing up for oneself, asking for help, and trusting that someone else could walk alongside you when the path was difficult. Their teamwork became more sophisticated. They developed strategies for handling difficult questions, anticipated possible challenges from opposing arguments, and prepared clear explanations. He continued to coordinate support from others, quietly ensuring that she had the resources and guidance necessary to present her case effectively. The courthouse, once a place of isolation and frustration for her, began to feel a little more manageable with him by her side. During one particularly intense hearing, she faced a skeptical judge and a challenging witness. She paused, collecting her thoughts, and glanced at the small notes he had prepared. With a deep breath, she addressed the court with clarity and confidence, using the timeline they had created to support her points. The witness's statements were gently challenged, and the judge acknowledged her reasoning. When the session ended, she allowed herself a small smile, a victory that was quiet but deeply meaningful. Afterwards, they walked together, the weight of the morning lifting slightly. "You've taught me a lot," she said quietly. "Not just about the case, but about having someone believe in you." He looked at her with understanding. Sometimes belief is enough to give someone strength. You've had that strength all along. I just helped you see it. Their partnership continued, day after day, hearing after hearing. They faced challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt, but each obstacle was met with determination and a shared commitment. She learned to trust not only in his support, but in herself, and he learned that even small acts of dedication could change someone's world. The journey was far from over, but together they had begun to turn the tide. The days grew longer, but he remained dedicated, arriving at the courthouse before most people had even begun their morning routines. He carried a new folder each day, filled with notes and ideas to help her navigate the courtroom. Every detail mattered: the judge's tone, the reactions of witnesses, and the small, subtle moments when her points were misunderstood. He had become her quiet guide, always ready to step in, not with words in court, but with support and preparation that made a real difference. She entered the courthouse with her usual composure, her uniform pressed and her medals shining under the fluorescent lights. Despite her disciplined appearance, he could see the exhaustion behind her eyes. He greeted her with a nod, and she returned it with a faint but sincere smile. The bond between them had grown, quiet but strong, and each knew they were not facing this challenge alone. During the hearings, she faced new challenges. Witnesses provided confusing statements, documents were questioned, and procedural issues arose that threatened to derail her case. Each time he remained close, quietly handing her notes, pointing out key points to remember, and reminding her of the timeline they had carefully built. His support was a steady presence, grounding her when the courtroom felt overwhelming. Outside the courtroom, they spent long hours organizing evidence and rehearsing responses. He helped her clarify her statements, anticipate questions, and present her points clearly. Together, they created charts, highlighted important sections, and discussed possible scenarios they might face. It was meticulous work, but each small step strengthened her confidence and her ability to advocate for herself. One afternoon, they met with a retired lawyer who had agreed to offer guidance. The lawyer was skeptical at first, unsure how a janitor and a former Marine could collaborate effectively. But as he explained the case, highlighted inconsistencies in the opposing arguments, and demonstrated his careful preparation, the lawyer began to see the value of their teamwork. He offered practical advice and even volunteered to attend certain hearings to provide legal insight. The retired lawyer's involvement was a turning point, showing that genuine dedication could inspire others to help Dot with this new support. Their preparation became even more thorough. He and the former Marine spent hours reviewing every detail, ensuring that nothing was overlooked. They rehearsed questions, anticipated challenges, and created backup plans for every possibility. She began to speak with a steadier voice, her confidence growing each day. The fear and uncertainty that had once clouded her eyes were gradually replaced by determination and clarity. Their partnership extended beyond the legal documents and courtroom strategies. He learned about her life, the missions she had led, the sacrifices she had made, and the challenges she had faced in combat. She listened as he shared his own struggles, raising a child alone, balancing work and home, and finding small victories in everyday life. These conversations were grounding, creating a human connection that strengthened their collaboration. They were not just working together, they were understanding and supporting each other as people. One evening, after a particularly intense day in court, she confided in him. "I feel like I'm finally being seen," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "Not just for my service, but for me as a person. You've helped me realize that I don't have to face this alone." He nodded, feeling a quiet pride. "You've done the hard part. You've endured so much. I'm just here to make sure you don't have to carry it all by yourself." As the hearings continued, they faced setbacks and obstacles. Some arguments did not go as planned, and there were moments when the judge seemed impatient or skeptical. But each time, they adapted. He noted every detail, every reaction, and used that information to prepare for the next session. She learned to anticipate these challenges and respond with calm confidence. Together, they became a team, navigating the complexities of the legal system with determination and strategy. The courthouse staff began to notice their efforts. Some were curious, others skeptical, but many were impressed by the dedication and focus he showed. He never sought recognition. His concern was always for her well-being and the fairness of the process. Slowly, whispers of their teamwork spread, and more people became willing to offer quiet support, whether through advice, guidance, or simply acknowledging the effort they were putting in. Outside the courtroom, their bond continued to strengthen. They would sit together on the courthouse steps, discussing strategy, reviewing notes, or simply talking about life. She shared memories from her military service, the challenges she faced, and the moments of bravery and loss that had shaped her. He shared stories of raising his child alone, the small victories that made life meaningful, and the lessons he had learned about resilience and perseverance. These conversations were not just background, they were part of the process, helping them understand each other and build a foundation of trust. One day, as they prepared for another hearing, she looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and determination. "I don't know what I would have done without you," she said quietly. "You've given me hope when I didn't think there was any left." He smiled softly, feeling the weight of her words. "Hope was always inside you." He replied, "I just helped you see it." Their teamwork became a model of quiet perseverance. Every detail, every document, and every conversation mattered. They anticipated challenges, prepared strategies, and learned from setbacks. She grew stronger, more confident, and more capable of standing up for herself. He remained her anchor, providing support, guidance, and unwavering belief in her ability to succeed. Weeks passed, and the case began to show signs of progress. The judge started to acknowledge the strength of her arguments, the clarity of her evidence, and the careful preparation that had gone into each session. Witnesses were addressed effectively, documents were clarified, and procedural issues were handled with precision. Each small victory built momentum, reinforcing the bond between them and strengthening her confidence. Through it all, he remained steadfast. His dedication was quiet but powerful, showing that even the simplest acts of support could have a profound impact. She learned to trust herself, to rely on his guidance, and to navigate the challenges of the courtroom with poise. And in turn, he learned that genuine care, perseverance, and belief in another person could change the course of someone's life. The journey was far from over, but the transformation was clear. She was no longer alone, no longer overwhelmed by fear and uncertainty. Together, they had built a partnership rooted in trust, respect, and shared determination. Each day brought new challenges, but they faced them with confidence and resilience. And as they continued, both knew that they were not just preparing for the next hearing, they were creating a story of courage, compassion, and the extraordinary power of human connection. The final week of hearings had arrived, and the atmosphere in the courthouse was tense, but charged with determination. He arrived early as always, carrying the accumulated notes, organized documents, and timelines that had taken weeks to prepare. The courthouse was busier than usual, with more people curious about the case that had slowly started drawing attention. She entered shortly after, her posture upright, her eyes steady. There was a calm confidence there now, a far cry from the exhaustion and worry that had marked her first days. They settled into their usual routine, reviewing key points one last time before the hearing began. Every detail mattered: questions from the judge, statements from witnesses, and how she would present her case clearly and confidently. He could see the focus in her eyes, the subtle way she prepared herself for every moment. He knew that this week could determine the outcome, and he silently vowed to be there every step of the way. Inside the courtroom, the proceedings began. The judge called for the first witness, and she handled the questions with precision, presenting the timeline and documents they had prepared together. He watched from the back, quietly supporting her, noting her confidence and clarity. The judge, who had been stern and skeptical in previous sessions, leaned forward, listening carefully. Even the staff and other attendees noticed the shift. She was no longer just a former Marine, struggling in a confusing legal system. She was a prepared, strong, and articulate individual presenting her case. Throughout the day, she faced challenges. New documents were introduced, and witnesses provided statements meant to complicate her case. Each time, he handed her discreet notes, reminded her of key points, and helped her remain composed. He could see her drawing strength from the preparation they had done together and from the quiet support he provided. Every small victory in clarity and comprehension built momentum, reinforcing her confidence. During a break, they stepped outside. The air was warm, and the sounds of the city offered a brief relief from the intensity of the courtroom. She took a deep breath, releasing some of the tension she had carried for weeks. "I feel ready," she said softly, a small smile on her lips. "I know I can do this." He nodded, feeling a swell of pride. "You've always had the strength. You just needed to see it for yourself." The remainder of the hearings were a careful balance of strategy, preparation, and adaptability. He helped her anticipate difficult questions, organize evidence effectively, and maintain composure even when the opposition tried to create confusion. They navigated each challenge with a quiet but steady determination, and the courtroom began to recognize her resilience. Even the judge, known for his strict demeanor, acknowledged the clarity and organization of her presentation. Outside the courtroom, they continued to refine their strategy. Each evening, they reviewed notes, anticipated possible scenarios, and discussed how to respond effectively. He offered guidance without judgment, creating a supportive environment that allowed her to think clearly and make confident decisions. Their collaboration had grown into a seamless partnership, where trust and respect guided every step. One evening, as they prepared for what could be the final day of hearings, she shared her thoughts. "I never imagined I would have someone like you by my side," she said quietly. "Someone who believes in me, even when the world seems indifferent." He smiled softly. "You've done the hard work. I'm just here to make sure you don't have to carry it all alone." Her eyes glistened with emotion, and she nodded, feeling a sense of reassurance she had not experienced in months. The final hearing arrived, and the courtroom was filled with a palpable sense of anticipation. Witnesses were present, documents reviewed, and arguments prepared. She entered with calm confidence, her eyes meeting his briefly, in a silent acknowledgment of the journey they had shared. He took his usual place at the back, quietly observing, supporting, and ready to provide discreet guidance if necessary. As the hearing progressed, it became clear that their preparation had paid off. Her points were clear and well supported by the evidence. Witnesses were addressed effectively, and the judge listened attentively. Even challenging statements were met with calm, precise responses. He watched with quiet satisfaction, noting the subtle changes, the steadiness of her voice, the clarity in her explanations, and the confidence that had grown from weeks of preparation and support. By the end of the day, the judge reviewed the case thoroughly. After careful consideration, a favorable ruling was announced. Her rights were restored, and the court acknowledged the challenges she had faced and the effort she had made to present her case effectively. Relief and joy washed over her face, and she looked at him, gratitude and pride shining in her eyes. "We did it," she whispered. He nodded, a quiet smile on his lips. "You did it. I just helped you along the way." Outside the courtroom, people who had followed the case approached her to offer congratulations. Colleagues, courthouse staff, and even strangers expressed admiration for her perseverance. She shared a quiet moment with him, their partnership having reached its full impact. It had started as a small gesture of support and had grown into a powerful force that changed the course of her life. In the days that followed, their story began to spread. People were inspired by the unlikely partnership, a single dad who worked quietly in the courthouse, and a former Marine facing an uphill legal battle. Their story highlighted the power of dedication, compassion, and human connection. But for them, the impact was personal. She had regained not only her legal standing, but also her sense of hope and confidence. He had shown that even small acts of commitment and support could make a profound difference in someone's life. They continued to meet occasionally, reflecting on the journey and the lessons learned. She spoke of the strength she had discovered within herself, and he reminded her that her courage had been there all along. Their bond, forged in moments of challenge, perseverance, and human connection, remained strong. It was a quiet reminder that true support and belief could change lives, restore hope, and create lasting impact. As he returned to his daily work, sweeping the courthouse floors and managing his responsibilities as a single parent, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had witnessed the power of dedication, empathy, and partnership, and she, having regained her strength, confidence, and legal standing, moved forward with renewed determination, carrying the lessons of resilience and trust with her. Their story was not just about a legal victory. It was about the human spirit, the importance of standing by someone when they need it most, and the extraordinary impact of ordinary acts of courage and care. And in that shared journey, they had both discovered something invaluable: the power of believing in each other, even when the world seemed indifferent.